Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed Fireside Chats. This week's topic is a very interesting one. It's kind of a big topic. We're talking about giants and giants throughout history and throughout cultures. There have been countless stories of giant beings that roamed this earth in antiquity and even up to present day. From the Nephilim of the Bible to the titans of Greek mythology, these towering figures have captivated our imaginations and played a prominent role in our stories for generations upon generations. But is there truth to these legends? Well, that's what Chris and I are going to figure out tonight with you. And we are very excited to ask the question, did giants walk among us in ancient times, or do they still walk among us today? So we're going to examine the archaeological evidence and the records of giant skeletons throughout the world. We're going to investigate some ancient texts today and the legends that speak of these colossal beings that have captivated, terrified us, and even perhaps ruled us throughout our history. So join us, grab a cup of hot cocoa, maybe a coffee, maybe your favorite dessert, and warm yourself up to another fireside chat. Chris, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm great, Brandon. I'm ready for some hot cocoa.
Oh
Let's do
yeah?
it.
Oh, I forgot to make you yours. Where are you now? You're in BC now.
Yeah, back in Vancouver. So you can
Wow,
just
welcome
ship
home.
that over. Thank you so much, my friend. Thank you. And it's a great intro because you tapped on and you touched on pretty much all of the different sort of aspects of giants that we're going to look at today. And for the beautiful audience watching and listening, giants are one of our favorite topics. As you can see, we've done a couple of episodes already. But this episode, I wanted to go into a couple of researchers that I highly recommend you guys follow up on. Their research is really fantastic and very diverse. So we're going to be tackling researchers like Praveen Mohan, who tackles more of the India, Sri Lanka area. We're going to go into some research by Jim Vieira, who's been featured on the History Channel many, many times for giants, and specifically in the UK and the Americas. And then also Michael Tellinger, who's more of the South Africa, kind of spectrum. But of course, everything connects. And we're also going to show some pretty captivating evidence of footprints as well as video that, of course, we never know if it's real or not, but it's always fun to take a look at and see what we got. So
I
that's the
love
episode
that.
today. Yeah.
I love that. And footprints, yes, footprints are a big one. Even getting into, Sasquatch and everything, which are giant beings, it's really hard to argue with footprints, especially when they have certain features on them that are hard to replicate, like dermal ridges, which are basically fingerprints for your foot, and the proper arcs and arches of your foot. Very, very interesting stuff. So, Chris, where would you like to start us off today? Where are we going?
Well, I'm going to start with Michael Tellinger because he's got a lecture here. Of course, everything's going to be in the show notes, everybody. So follow up on all this because I'm going to take small snippets of hour to 2 hour long lectures here that are honestly really, really incredible. If you pay for YouTube, you can, I think, listen to them offline while you're walking through the forest or something, kind of like a podcast or something. Highly recommend doing so because all this information is just it goes well beyond giants, and it really starts to connect a lot of dots for the mysterious reality that we find ourselves in, and of course, the incredible history here on planet Earth. So let's start off with Michael Tellinger giving more of an overview of what who these giants could have been, and just kind of an introduction into the work that he's doing with giants and the really incredible evidence that he's found. Because what I find with these researchers is they all have pretty mind-blowing evidence, and it's always there's variation. Some things start to come together as similarities, but a lot of these people have amazingly different research. So let's get into the first video here. This is a lecture hosted by actually a partner of Ancient Mysteries Unearthed, Zohar Stargate. They're a great channel. Highly recommend checking them out because they're actually featuring some of our footage here on Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. Some of my stuff that I shot in Egypt, for example, has just started to be released on Zohar. So they're awesome friends of the channel. And Michael Tellinger is also a friend of the channel. So here we go. Let's take a watch and listen. Brandon, let me know if, as always, we've got the sound working here. So let's go. Let's take a look.
And it seems that these giants in history play a very important role, much bigger role. And this is where we have to start remembering that history is much older, more stranger, and more unbelievable than most of us can imagine. And when the gods were on earth, there were giants. And this is a very important part of our history, our reality that we have to deal with. Somebody went to a lot of trouble to show these. It's a great little illustration of real giant discoveries. This is not somebody's theory. These are real ancient discoveries. We are extreme left, 6 feet tall there. That's a little guy there. That's us. But this is nothing compared to the real giants. The Jewish Encyclopedia talks about the giants and the Anakim are the same titanic race as the Rephaim, the Nephilim, the Gibborim, the Zamzumim, and the Emim. And the giants were between, it also tells us in the book of Enoch that the giants were between 300 and 3,000 ells tall. I'll talk more about that. That actually ranges from 130 meters to 1.5 kilometers tall. 1.5 kilometers, that's almost a mile tall. Okay, so rethink everything. If you've not contemplated this size before, start thinking about this. We're dealing with real history of this planet that's been removed from us, removed from our system, removed from our memory. 20% larger than we are. And this is the Boskopskull on the left, found in South Africa as well. This is nothing. The bone of the giant found in Namibia that is at Wits University in Johannesburg, that's nothing. These guys may have been twice the size of us. And it gets more interesting. This footprint in China gets a little bit more interesting. But obviously the most beautiful footprint of a giant in a rock must be in South Africa, and it is. There it is. And you'll go and see this when you come one of our trips, a Sacred Sites tour, on one of the shorter trips that I'm putting together now, because I'm going to spend a lot more energy and focus on this in the coming months and years. This is a spectacular story about this, and Klaus Donner found in Ecuador a nose bone, a heel bone, and a skull fragment that was genetically tested in Vienna and proved to be humanoid and giant. And the skeleton of this giant in Ecuador is actually in the museum in Ecuador. Here it is. It's been reconstructed and it's actually in the museum. You can go and see it.
So I have to interject quickly.
Yeah, please do, because this was a controversy in one of our last episodes.
So this particular skeleton, I had to interject for a moment because we got a lot of flack. Not a lot of flack, actually, a bit of flack, but just a lot of really good constructive criticism and feedback on the episode we did of giants, actually the most popular episode. And we featured this skeleton. And so what we've also heard in the comments, so Michael's confirming what we thought, which was this is a skeleton that's real and in Ecuador. He's saying it is as well. He's got really great connections. I stayed with Michael for 2 weeks at his Stone Circle Museum. So he's definitely the real deal when it comes to the research. However, I have to mention that some of the comments that we got suggested that this skeleton actually is in Switzerland, specifically Interlaken, Switzerland, which I've actually been there. It's a kind of a random place to have a museum that's going to have a giant skeleton that's about seven meters high, so something like 17 feet or so or more. So jury's still out because we're getting conflicting information on this one. But I think we can all start to agree that the evidence is overwhelming. And even if this skeleton isn't real, although I do believe it is, because we did get comments of this particular skeleton where we have comments that talk about people who have been to this museum and seen it in real life.
I would like to go there.
Let's do it. Ancient Mysteries Unearthed field trip. Let's
go check that out.
So I just wanted to jump in quickly to mention that. So Michael's confirming that it is real. However, we're still not sure about the location now because we're getting conflicting things. But hey, it's an incredible situation. We're going to keep playing this because there's a little bit more left.
And you know what? To our audience, what a great opportunity to drop a comment and let us know your thoughts. Do you believe that something like this could exist? I wonder sometimes if when information challenges us to such a degree, and there is kind of more of a foundation of it, is it possible that we naturally need the ability to reject that as untrue? And also on the other side of things, if we want to believe enough, do we fall prey to being a little too lackadaisical with our defenses as far as skepticism? So let us know down in the comments below. Like and subscribe as well while you're doing that. And Chris, let's keep this thing going.
Absolutely.
Meet a giant in a museum in Ecuador. And these were just small giants, because when you read Leviticus, it says that we were like locusts by their side. And in the book of Enoch, it says the giants were 3,000 ells tall. 1 ell is about just less than half a meter. That means it would make the giants 1.5 kilometers, or just less than 1 mile tall. And some of you may have seen the new discoveries of the giant trees that we seem to have lost around the world, that were somehow chopped down. I now believe that many of those trees were accompanied by giants as well, and we have lots of remains of giants. All of us have monoatomic elements floating around in our bodies.
So Michael goes into some really fascinating stuff. Again, recommend checking out the full lecture. He's a really I think he's a real special researcher, because he just goes all over the place, but then connects it all together really, really well. He's one of the best at doing that, because there's just so much incredible information out there. I wanted to touch quickly on, before we move to the next video, and we'll head over to India and Sri Lanka after this. I wanted to go into quickly the size that he's talking about here. We're talking, this is getting into the Titans. This is getting into those very mythological giants that are a mile high, 1.5 kilometers tall. I mean, Brandon, can you even imagine what that would be like what would that be like to witness something like that?
You know, you hear stories about people in the past, different cultures, the First Nations cultures here in Ontario. A lot of, if you are not from Ontario and you're not familiar with the Great Lakes, you should come visit, because they're gorgeous. And my favorite part of the Great Lakes system is an area called Georgian Bay. And I know in that area on Lake Huron, they talk about how the giants shaped the bay, and that they literally scooped it up and threw rocks, and rocks became the islands. And you're talking about, and they have, calling that rock formation out there is called Sleeping Giant, and it's kilometers long. And you're like, okay, well, to me, that's where they lost me. I'm like, I think this is myth, until I started to hear about, the Hebrew references to massive giants. And you hear about more cultures talking about massive giants. And I'm going, well, if back in the day, they're saying that giants could literally terraform the earth with their hands, and that seemed like it's such a great way to describe, geology, as we would say, academia might suggest. But to hear the fantastical version of it, well, it's kind of weird when it kind of gets cross-culturally referenced. You know what I mean? That's so, if I could imagine that, yes, I could, because I've heard those stories before.
Yeah, I love it, Brandon. Absolutely. And this folklore of sleeping giants, these massive beings that then sort of almost solidify or fossilize into what we now could call a mountain or a hill or whatever. These stories go as far back as we know in our history and in time. So I think the questions just have to be asked. Is that even possible? Another thing that Michael Tellinger gets into, and I might have to dive into this on another episode sometime.
Yes, you're going to say the trees. I know you're going to say the
trees and mud fossils in general.
Ooh.
So the cool thing, the trees, for example, yes, ancient trees absolutely existed. Now, this isn't that crazy of an idea, because let's be honest, like we already know through science, like back in the age of the dinosaurs, everything was bigger, right? Plant life was bigger, everything was larger. So it's not crazy to say like 1 billion years ago that everything was massive on this planet, because it was. We already know this through mainstream science. So is it crazy to think that some of these flat top mountains that we look at, specifically, let's use the example of the one in Cape Town, South Africa, near Michael Tellinger, there's that flat top mountain, very famous just outside of Cape Town. Could that have been an ancient tree stump? When you look at it from afar and you juxtapose that with a tree stump, let's say maybe an old growth tree stump from where I am here in British Columbia, and you put them at the same ratio to each other, they look identical. I mean, they literally look identical. And so what Michael gets into is this phenomenon that's not very well known, even among geologists. Oops, lost my light there. Is called mud fossilization. Mud fossilization is something that took me a while to wrap my head around, but I've actually started to understand it better now. And what that does is, instead of slow fossilization that we're taught that happens over millions of years, there is the opportunity and there is the occasion where, let's say, a mudslide or certain minerals, let's say they're volcanic, they could be a whole mixture of things, happen, let's say during a catastrophe or something of some sorts, and then the mud fossilizes things around it. And then what you start to get are what look to us like rocks, except one of the major properties is that these things they ring like bells. And so there's these rocks all around South Africa that ring like bells that I got to see when I was down there. And we thought they were more resonant rocks, which they are. And they were being used to build these stone circle ruins, which was interesting. But then Michael had this epiphany not so long ago that these weren't just rocks, these are actually fossilized body parts. And that one, while I was down there, I literally could not wrap my head around it. I was just like, that's crazy. That is actually crazy. And while I was down there, I still just, I couldn't get it. I couldn't believe it. Now, a couple of years later, looking back at it, it's starting to make sense because these rocks do look quite particular. And I should have had some examples ready for this one, but we'll go into that in another episode, because this whole thing it's a pretty crazy rabbit hole, because all of a sudden you start to realize that not all rocks, definitely not, but some of these ones specifically in South Africa are definitely not typical rocks, I'll put it that way, and they do look like body parts. And some of these body parts are like huge feet, femurs, hearts, organs, things like that. And when you look at the size of them, they're coming from beings that are, well, at least putting that myth to the test of these biblically mile high size giants. So go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I was just, it's just when you hear about the story of the Titans and all these things, and the Norse, and I know a lot of the creation myths and a lot of what they're saying is actually echoed in other cultures, but they talk about, the life trees, or the tree of life or whatever, that shoots up into the atmosphere basically. And we assume that that's some sort of metaphor. And then we start looking at these, tabletop mountains. And then what you're saying there too, fossilization, if we're, still making discoveries upon that, and some of these are organic living creatures that we're looking at as stone geological formations. I mean, it just opens up this whole new Pandora's box that starts blowing your mind, that if you bring up in public, so you might as well make a podcast about it. People go, "What are you talking about, man?
You're crazy."
But really, if you were to say you did a psychedelic or something like that, you might be more open to that idea and be plugging into something more. Not condoning any of that, not dismissing any of that either. But it's just crazy that sometimes we literally have to expand our minds to understand this, and science works that way too. Trying to describe the multiverse, right? Or quantum
physics.
Computers.
Yeah.
You have to expand your mind to even wrap your head around these concepts. So that's where my mind goes. I'm thinking that the truth is stranger than fiction in a lot of ways.
Always.
It's just so incredible to understand it all. So
it's nuts. So let's take us to a new, this is another interesting, I would say, form of evidence that I'm glad Praveen Mohan, he does. I don't actually know what his background is. Obviously I'm sure he has Indian background, but what I mean is that I don't know if he was born in America, because he obviously speaks English very well too. But I know he speaks, I think he speaks Tamil and some other local languages to Sri Lanka and to India. And why I mention that is because he's able to go to locals and talk to them and get the locals' history. And he mentions that, I believe, in this video that we're going to check out right now. And just listen to what the local tour guides say about the gods that they worship and the way that they talk about them. It's not a myth. Just saying, they talk about these people as if they were real. So let's take a watch and a listen to this one.
Now, India is the only country which has still preserved its ancient religion and monuments. Ancient Indian history, now known as mythology, is still read by millions of people. But the most important piece of history comes from locals. Local history gets passed on from generation to generation orally, and this man is not just another local, he is the official tour guide of Lepakshi Temple. Watch what he says about the gods Sita and Krishna who lived in previous eras.
Measurement 2.5 feet. 2.5 feet it long. At that time, Sita's height 25 feet height. Sita's height 25.
Sita's height was 25.
That is small lady in that time. Sita is a very small lady. Chota. Ante appatlo all people in that time 28, 30 ala unnaru. Sita is a very small 25.
Sita was 25 feet
25,
high,
that
and
is
that
small.
was
That is Treta
smaller.
That is Treta. Next Dwaparayugam. Dwaparayugam understand?
Yeah,
Krishna period.
Yeah.
That time all people 15 feet.
15 feet.
15 feet.
Oh.
Different. Those days all people 8 feet height.
Oh.
500 years back all people 8 feet.
500 years back, everybody say 8
Everybody
feet.
7.5, 8.
As you can see, he not only mentions gods who stood 25 feet and 15 feet in different eras, but also states that the builders of the new temple were also 8 feet tall. If this is true, why don't we find skeletons of giants? We find skeletons of 100 feet dinosaurs, and we find a new one every week. So why don't we find these giant skeletons of ancient builders? But that's not an accurate question. The accurate question is, do we really not find these skeletons?
Just going to break to commercial here, but he brings up really good questions. Good old Praveen Mohan, and I appreciate that about him, is that he asks a lot of these really important questions, and then again gets the local perspective. So everything we're taught in school, just remember, everybody, is one narrative, okay, and it's always written by the victors. As we know, the reigning powers that be are the ones dictating what we learn in history. But when you talk to locals, just listen how different the history is. It's something to consider, because we could be missing out on, some pretty incredible stuff when it comes to not just our history, but the history of, everything that we could possibly imagine. So I'm going to,
Chris, I just want to comment on that. I think it's interesting when the narrative, the narrative that we accept as a society is that we have to be, understanding and accepting of all people's beliefs. But it's funny how quickly that goes down with the dishwater as soon as people's beliefs seem fantastical. I was ridiculed the other day at a party. Someone brought up the fact that I believe in Sasquatch. And everyone was laughing at me. But meanwhile, the conversation before that, we were having a nice conversation about acceptance and other cultural beliefs and how we have to be understanding of them. And, certainly to a lot of people, much like these gentlemen in India here who are talking about, 500 years ago, this is what I believe. This is how tall they were by the records that I'm studying, or say you were with some different cultures in BC there, and you were to say, I don't believe in Sasquatch. That's who could ever do that? Some people believe that, and there's evidence and history to support these. So it's just very interesting how we're kind of a black and white kind of understanding of the world, where only if it fits our narrative do we want to accept it and digest this information.
Yeah, especially these days. Weirdly enough, it's like with the internet, you've kind of got two branches, and I hate division in general. We're all obviously connected. We're all very much a part of the same source of creation here. However, what it seems to be on the surface right now is that there's a division of like people that want to think one particular way, and then other people, and I think this population and percentage is growing now, of people that are like, you know what? It could be this, could be that. It could be a whole slew of these things. Life is gray. It is not black and white. It's very nuanced. And it's such an incredible reality that we live in. Literally anything is possible. It's an infinite universe of infinite creation. Of course, anything is possible. Doesn't mean what you're saying right now is true, perhaps, but it absolutely doesn't mean that you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is like, there's so much potential to the magic and the incredibleness of our history that we just should not shun away from it because it sounds crazy, because honestly reality is crazy, and like you said, truth is always stranger than fiction. So
Well, I often wonder about the power of belief and the actual powers that we all have as human beings. And the more we believe in something collectively, it might even manifest that into existence.
yep.
So sometimes I wonder that the belief in dragons or giants or ghosts or aliens, maybe it wasn't true at one point, but the more that we start to look into it, almost the more that the universe is rewarding your belief in that. So to that note, sometimes I think that it is important to believe that we're all powerful, beautiful creatures who do want to love and support each other, because that might be echoed in our universe. So much
And
like our subscribers, you beautiful people,
you
So
beautiful, lovely watchers of the show, listeners of the show. So let's keep it going. We got another one here in India, and this is a really great example that the same gentleman, Praveen Mohan, again in the show notes. Check him out. Great channel, great researcher. He's been canceled several times, so he's right on the money. Anyone that's usually getting canceled off of YouTube these days or censored typically means that they're right on the money, that their information is a little too let's say thought-provoking for the mainstream. So he's had to rebrand a couple times, but check him out. This is an interesting example of one of the reasons why we don't always get to see these giant skeletons, because yes, there is certainly a cover-up, as we know, with the Smithsonian and the North America, certainly. However, there is also other sides to it, which is just straight up vandalism and looting. And that definitely plays a part. And I don't want to, completely say it's all conspiracy and all the elites are taking up the giant bones. Yes, that's probably also happening. However, also when this news gets out, vandalism can be a thing. And that's what we're going to talk about here, among some other really interesting evidence of giants in India.
Entire place. In fact, such an incident happened just a few months ago in Meerut, Uttar Pradesh. Intriguingly, the 2,500-year-old scripture Mahabharata says that Bhima lived in a city called Hastinapur, which is now located in the district of Meerut. On August 8, 2014, a skeleton was accidentally discovered by miners. Locals say that this skeleton was over 15 feet tall and was covered with metal ornaments and had a crown on its head. Word quickly spread that Bhima's skeleton was found, and before the police could reach the site, looters had taken away the giant skeleton and the ornaments, leaving just a few fragments behind. Is it possible that this was the skeleton of Bhima or one of his descendants? Is this enough evidence that giants were not just mythical figures but were in fact real? If Bhima did construct this gigantic structure in Mahabalipuram, what happened after that? Locals claim that Bhima wandered around for a few days and tested if this potion's effect was permanent by stomping on a rock and created a footprint. If this is true, can we find this giant footprint somewhere near Mahabalipuram? In a small village called Lepakshi in the state of Andhra Pradesh, we can find a giant footprint. Could this be Bhima's footprint? The locals here claim that it is not the footprint of Bhima but belongs to his half-brother Hanuman, who also happens to be a giant. This footprint
is more than 4 feet long.
This is a camera lucida, and for the whole of the 19th.
Well, once again, you get the idea there. So we got an ad that came in there, but it actually cut it off at the right point. So this footprint that he's mentioning is really close to where these legends, these myths, talk about these beings that were huge, that were giants, that weren't even human by this sounds of certainly the Indian and the gods in the Vedas. None of them are human. And it talks about the like one of them getting new powers and trying to test them out, and then imprints one of their feet, and here we are finding a footprint really close to where that site is. It's just like, I like to use the example of, and I forget the gentleman who basically listened to the legend of Troy and Helena of Troy specifically, and went to where the legend said it was this ancient city was, dug and found it, and there you go, right? So these myths have a lot more, substance than I think we give them credit for.
That was actually a trend in the 1800s that people were starting to realize that if they looked at the Bible, not as this kind of wishy-washy, more religious text, but having more of a historical significance than they ever gave it credit for, it kind of boomed this new archaeological kind of golden age of finding ancient sites by using the references in these ancient texts. So, and our speaker there, he made a great point saying, is this enough evidence that they found this skeleton that was 7+ feet tall, and that the whole village was all excited, and that there was vandals, and the bones seemed to disappear? But what was this report enough evidence? Well, it's not just that one report is enough evidence. And truly, it's not enough evidence to convince, the mainstream, but I don't know if there is enough evidence to convince the mainstream. It's going to be enough to convince people like Steven Spielberg to write, screenplays on this stuff, because there's enough there that it is very interesting. But we keep seeing those reports of people finding anomalies, skeletons, and digging them up, and then recording them and having brief stints in history about it, and then having them disappear. And I wonder if it happens again with now everyone having smartphones, if we won't see kind of a more undeniable approach to this phenomenon, because I imagine that we haven't dug up all the evidence yet.
Not even close. Not even close. We've just got scanning technology now that is just scratching the surface, pun intended, on these sites. We've got things like LiDAR that's only been around for at best a decade. And the stuff that LiDAR's found just in the Amazon forest alone, I mean, they've discovered tens of thousands of structures under the foliage, which implies cities of populations of over 1 million. And that's just the beginning of it. What about ground penetrating radar that gets way better than it currently is, and can actually start to look beneath things like the Sahara Desert? I've heard so many things about all these lost civilizations under the Sahara Desert, underneath Egypt. The Egypt that we think is ancient, there's a whole city underneath that. What about Antarctica? I mean, the list just keeps going on and on and on. So I wanted to bring you beautiful folks watching and listening to another researcher that I really recommend looking into. There's so many well outside of this episode, but this gentleman, Jim Vieira, you may have heard of him. He's been featured on History Channel many times. Giants in America, I know that's a book he co-wrote with Hugh Newman, I believe. Hugh Newman's another really good one to look into. Hugh's done some great research all around the world, certainly, but also in Sardinia, which is somewhere I want to go check out soon. Let's listen to Jim at the Megalithomania conference, which I think is also Hugh Newman who puts that together. This is on a channel called Megalithomania UK. They're a great channel. Highly recommend checking them out. This is Jim going over kind of a general bit of evidence that he's come across in his studies on the giants throughout the world. I think we're going to look into giants from all over the place in this particular talk here, and some pretty interesting evidence. Again, as you're saying, Brandon, is this one bit of evidence enough? No, but we're just going to keep showing you guys today just the amount. There is a ton of evidence, and it's very different forms of evidence. So let's take a look and listen here.
Now, this idea of giants is all throughout Mexico and all throughout South America. One of the Spanish priests chronicled this oral tradition of killing a giant in the mountains that the Toltecs told him. And this is a codex in the Vatican. And make of it what you want, but this is the idea, just like native people and people all around the world, that there was a cannibalistic race of giants that existed. And here are some of the accounts from Mexico. Charles Clapp, who recently returned from Mexico, has been in charge of Thomas Lawson's mining interests. He has called the attention of Professor Agassiz to a remarkable discovery made by him. He found in Mexico a cave containing some 200 skeletons of men, each above 8 feet in height. The cave was evidently the burial place of a race of giants who antedated the Aztecs. So you have many of these accounts, 10 foot tall in Nayarit, Mexico. Two men said the discovery had made in great burial mounds in the mountains of southwest here. And you just have these explorers and archaeologists reporting, some outrageous things around the planet. Right here, Hugh and I are in a burial mound site around 6,000 years old in France. And these are some of the megalithic sites that we visited. And we took a trip to France to look for the bones of the giant of Castelnau. So here is the Grand Menhir. It was once 70 foot tall, 350 tons, at least 600 and 7,500 years old. And look how tall it was when it was once in standing. This is a recreation of it right here. So you have these giant structures everywhere, and you have these legends of giants in the area of Brittany, just like so many other places. So here is famous Karnak, Mont Saint-Michel, and this is the account we went to investigate and look for the bones. Basically, in 1890, 4 different bones, femoral midshaft and other parts were found, and the anthropologist Laplanche studied them. And there was a peer review at the time of this case. And here are the bones right here. And this story was brought to us by the researcher Micah Ewer, who's a friend of mine and has done a lot of work in this area and uncovering these buried reports. Right here is another shot of it. And this is what these bones look like when compared and rearticulated into proper size. You have basically the remains of an 11-foot giant. And that's what the conclusion was of these scientists at the time. And they indicated it wasn't morbid growth, it wasn't pituitary gigantism. So Laplanche, well-regarded anthropologist, respected by Madison Grant and even included in Topinard's journals. So his atheistic, Darwinian, socialist, anti-Semitic, eugenist views make his discovery of giant bones all the more noteworthy. This is what Micah Ewers was saying about this find. His calculations indicate the Neolithic giant man was a...
And hold on, folks.
And a quick
about
advertisement.
3.5 meters tall and several hundred kilograms weight, 11 feet 6 and 1,000 pounds. So we went and we searched for these bones at the University of Montpellier. But Laplanche was fired because he was such an anti-Semitic and a racist. So we were looking and trying to find if they were in a private collection or not, because we wanted to get them examined and DNA tested. But so far, we haven't found what happened to them. So that story doesn't stand alone. Right here you have skulls measuring 28, 31, and 32 inches of circumference, which is absolutely enormous. And they were supposed to have been brought to the Paris Academy. Once again, these ancient reports or these ancient remains are brought to different institutions, and then they can't seem to be located. We have many of these accounts from France. Bones of giants are unearthed near Paris. This is after the war that German prisoners found many of these giant remains. This skeleton, one of which measured 8 feet 7 inches, lay in a sarcophagus formed of flat stones in Gap, France. This one is particularly interesting. In each case, the heads were of great size with huge jawbones. In the US, you have many of these accounts where the jawbone fits over the face. Right here, a 13-foot long skeleton uncovered. And basically, Cecilia Hall, our friend, put together this map in the US showing all these accounts. Once again, I'm not going to claim everyone is true, but there's another story going on here. Is it, can it be that all these were conjured up as hoaxes or mismeasurements? It really seems unlikely. And
so I got to go back and just show, look at this. Look at this.
This looks like basically a map of like what you would expect for like a ghost sighting. Like all these places had a ghost sighting, but all these places are them digging up skeletons. And an interesting fact, and I read a wonderful book, I think it was called The Ancient Giants Who Once Ruled North America. It was all primary documents. So basically what he's dealing with too, they did constantly reference the jawbone fitting over the face. And the way that I always interpreted that was, imagine a football helmet and it's got, or a motorcycle helmet, how it's got the jaw guard there. Well, that's what they're referring to, is the fact that basically you could put on one of these skulls as a helmet. So that's how big it was.
That's insane. I mean, that's just so crazy. Imagine, I'm sure that people not so long ago probably used them as helmets. Why wouldn't you? It's like a free piece of protection. And these giants were right. Their bones were so freaking strong and thick. We know that, right? Just like even the Neanderthal have like a much denser bone than we do. So it's basically, that's a free helmet. That's free armor. Why not use that, right? So yeah, I find that quite fascinating. And basically, it leads us into more questions. So one question I want to bring up to you, wonderful audience listening and watching, is how big can these giants get? And I want you to keep that question suspended in your mind when we look at this next video by a channel that we've featured before here on the channel, Night God 333, and he's gonna show some research that he has done on Google Maps, Google Earth, to find what he's claiming are ancient, massive, giant footprints. And as much as that might sound crazy at first, remember everything we've shown you up until now, where there is at least a possibility of giants that were, at least at one point, this large, roaming the earth. Since that could be theoretically possible, then these footprints that we're going to take a look at on Google Earth could also be potentially possible, or not. But let's take a look, and of course, as always, let us know in the comments what you think. Is there something to it? And he's going to also talk a little bit about the Book of Enoch, which I think is worth mentioning as well. So let's take a gander here.
So in the Book of Enoch, in chapter 7, it states that the fallen came down and bred with the daughters of men. They took unto themselves wives and chose one for each himself. And they three became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells. Now, if you don't know what ell means, elbow to hand. That's a unit of measure they used back then. In certain societies, the length an ell represented differed, ranging from what is commonly known as 18 inches. But as I looked it up, the average from the French to the Scottish was well over 2 feet. The Scottish, 54 inches was an ell. So I've been looking into Norse and Greek mythology, and they talk about Zeus, the son of Cronus. Cronus was a titan, and he ate all of his children in fear that they would overthrow his throne. Cronus' wife, Rhea, grew angry over this, so she decided to take one of his sons and hide him. His name was Zeus, and he was hid and raised on Crete Island. So a while back, I remember doing a video on Crete Island and how there was a lot of giants' remains found there. The remains found ranged anywhere from 40 feet up to 72 feet in length. And I also read that there was a lot of giant activity around Sardinia, so I began looking on Google Earth to check it out. Crete Island, Sardinia. And here's what I found on the ocean floor next to Sardinia. All of these, what look like footsteps. I'm saying if you took a regular person and told them to take steps and multiple steps on the beach in clay or sand and then mimic them, these will line up pretty close to the same steps and foot patterns as what a human would lay. So I humored the idea and thought, well, maybe it was a giant. And here's what I found. Upon zooming in and using the measurement tool on Google Earth, one of those footsteps was 4,625 feet. There's more. And these footprints appeared all over, up the coast of Africa, all through the Mediterranean. You could find these footprints. And what's more amazing I found some that strided out. Stride 10.4 miles. So I guess what I'm saying is, could these footprints have been left by a Titan? Possibly even Cronus. And my boy Mini Minuteman, who criticized me.
So he goes on, obviously in this video here, but like, or you know what, I'll keep this full screen because it's an interesting question. When I first watched this, I was like, well, they don't really look like footprints, but it's also way too low res to really get a good sense. You know, like this is just, to me, it's just too low res to really get a good sense. However, it's an interesting question because first of all, there's so much underwater that we still have yet to discover, to yet understand, that I think is going to blow the lid off of our history completely, certainly with regards to civilizations that are underwater. But also, why couldn't these be, let's say, footprints from also when this wasn't underwater? Perhaps it got fossilized, and then boom, here you are now seeing a 4,625 foot long footprint, which would work if these giants were a mile high. It would line up. So I don't know. More evidence. What do you think? Let us know in the comments, everybody.
Yeah, it's just interesting too. Just the concept of having, a few kilometers long footprint is just
it's just like my brain sometimes, and I love it.
It's gonna be to our listening audience, you guys are a very special breed because it's gonna be tough to talk about this stuff with anyone in your circle, because oftentimes I find that, even to minuscule things that there is evidence towards that's not supported by the mainstream media, you get met with a lot of roadblocks in discussion. And truly, I do miss kind of the art of discussion. I feel like we're losing it, and I do encourage you all to celebrate it more and not get so upset with people with different views, because without an open discussion that challenges and is not angry or not dismissive of other people's views, but welcoming and think of it more like a soup rather than like a one ingredient meal. The soup of society is good, so open it up, get the discussion going. There's probably aspects of this podcast right now where you're like, I was on board, but that one's a little weird. That's okay to feel that. Just keep along for the ride and enjoy it, because I certainly am. So
me too. And before we end off this episode, we've got 2 more videos here. So we've got straight up video footage now that we're gonna save the best for last. Although, yeah, of course, the other stuff is actually fascinating. If anything, maybe more legit than the video footage itself, because hey, we can always fake video. But I want to show it anyway because it's worth considering. And we're going to start in Mexico. There's 2 giants. They could even be the same one featured in Mexico. These are 2 videos of 2 different places in Mexico. So let's take a look at this one first, and then we'll look at another one that I believe is also in Peru. So get ready.
Take a look. Now, as you can see, there is a being at the top of that mountain in Mexico. The bottom footage is zoomed in and the top footage is already zoomed in a little. But when you take into consideration the size of these mountains in Mexico, even by looking at the houses, at the trees, and then comparing the being on top of that mountain in perspective to the size of the mountain, that being must be at least 8, 9, maybe even 10 foot tall. If this is real footage, then it's quite shocking, honestly. And I'm not sure what that being is doing. He's acting quite strange. This could always be a prank of some sort. It could always be somebody on stilts, or people who have planned to make a costume that looks huge. But I don't think it is. The way that this is being filmed, it seems that the person randomly captured this on camera. And I'm going to show you another piece of footage which people suspect of being the same giant in a different location in Mexico, but near a school. Take a look.
Tackle it all with Dakota.
So you're seeing right now as we break into a commercial here,
Mark's Work Warehouse.
But the camera footage is shaky, but there's something going on. It looks definitely humanoid-ish. Let's take a
Here's
look.
the same footage zoomed in, and of course the shaky camera and the low quality doesn't help, but there is a possibility that this could be the same being, because it's also apparently in Mexico. Now I'm not sure what this being would be doing, if it is a giant or a Nephilim, why it would be walking around on the top of a mountain. I'm sure that they would have been here for a very long time if it was truly a giant or a Nephilim, and it would know that it's probably going to be spotted there. But either way, whatever it's doing, let me know what you think is going on here in the comment section below. And we're going to dive into the Bible study and see what the Bible says about giants.
We'll skip the Bible study for today, but it is, worth looking into these ancient texts like the Bible with a new set of eyes.
Just the sheer amount of references to giants in the Bible is insane.
Crazy.
It's
nuts.
It's just insane. It's overwhelming, and they give detailed accounts of the tribes and the ancestors and the bloodlines, and the bloodlines alone are enough to make me question that, this is obviously they're taking the time to talk about this. Now we have had fictional, like Lord of the Rings, talking about bloodlines and stuff, and the Silmarillion, and they just document that, and that's a fictional account. But the Bible is not really known to be much of a fictional account, really, and a lot of people take that book very seriously. So just very interesting that giants are such a prominent factor in that.
Yep, and it's worldwide, because we're going to go now to Peru and take a look at this last video for the episode today, which is just a family. You can hear them in quite a bit distress seeing this supposed giant. And once again, let us know in the comments what you think about this. Is it real? Is it legit? Let us know.
This recording here, let's check it out.
So two of them this time.
Yeah.
So here you could see it just stand up, tower over the thing to the other giant to the right. It's towering over him, and you can see how it kind of just stands up and stretches its arms, and is hanging out, just kind of doing a normal thing, kind of like we would after, just sitting on a hill. You stand up, you stretch, and then you head out. This is exactly what this thing is doing, but this thing is giant. This thing is humongous. I mean, these are his arms here. You can see his thunderous thighs. I mean, this thing looked like it could pick up a boulder and just lob it to the town. I mean, that's how scary and petrifying this thing is. And the lady's yelling. I'd be yelling too. I mean, if I saw something like that, and for good reason she started recording, she probably saw some movement prior, but his arms flailing him around, and then eventually he takes a seat again. But you could see how it looks like a human. Right there it goes, sits down again, looking around, like just poking its head. It's very scary, if you were to ask me. Intimidating.
I do this comparison thing that's not really worth watching, to be honest. But yeah, that's my camera's gone.
Well, so just getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of these videos, they're obviously from a long distance away. They're being shot. There's not much detail in the bodies. But saying that, to have beings moving from that distance on top of a mountaintop, things don't look big.
No.
On top of a mountain, they often look little, very small. If you were to try and look at me, you'd need binoculars or something. If I was to try and be waving from you, and you'd be like, I don't know what you're doing. I think I see you because you're wearing a high-vis shirt or something like that. To see these giants, really giants on top, it is compelling because it doesn't look like great filmmaking in the works, if you know what I mean. It's not like if you were to go through all this elaborate hoaxing, you would think, unless you just CGI'd that on top, which I guess is always a possibility, but why have the shaky camera? Why have the children's schoolyard? Why? It does sell it. It does sell it having it be crappy footage,
Yeah.
but I just wonder if you were to go through it all, most filmmakers I don't think could help themselves but have a better quality camera.
Yeah, you'd want something a little juicier, to be honest. They're almost underwhelming in a way, some of these
Right.
videos where you're like, they're not quite good enough, but that's what actually makes them, to me, feel more legitimate because, you know,
Because that's what happens when you whip out a cell phone and you're panicking
Yeah.
and you're, you know, calling your mom saying, "Holy crap, what is that thing up there?" That's, although it's far away, it's way too close to our house for me to be comfortable with. I'm gonna have nightmares about this. That's, and the emotion behind the camera person there.
she's
You know,
scared.
yeah, Dios míos. I don't really know what that means, but I
Oh my
kind
God, I
of,
think, or,
yeah,
like,
right.
yeah,
I've heard it before. It's usually not something that you use lightly. It's kind of more of like you're
like,
you're
holy crap,
scared.
this is
Yeah, you're
crazy.
spooked. It's challenging. It's challenging your reality and your perception of that. And that's an interesting thing that I think we all are actually scared of, is that moment in our lives if we ever see a ghost or you see a gnome or you see a giant or you see some sort of weird phenomenon in nature that happens that you're like, what am I witnessing? This can't be real. That moment is, I think that's very tough for us to go through. And I think that I think we actually have natural blockers setting us up to almost dismiss it so that we don't have too much trauma from it.
Yeah, it's a defense mechanism. You hear stories of even the First Nations people of North America when the colonists first came over, they actually couldn't see the colonists because they were in these boats that they just had never fathomed in their mind of what they would even look like, what they would even be, and they actually couldn't see them until their chief said, "Hey, look at these boats, these things coming to our land." And then all of a sudden, because their chief, who they respect and they believe, said something, just like we do with our mainstream media, the second the mainstream media says it's real, well, now it's real, right? Now we can believe it. Now we're allowed to believe it. And then there's something that switches in our mind because we've been programmed this way to be like, oh, yeah, maybe that is possible. And it was the same with the First Nations people. Supposedly, that's just something I've heard quite a lot, where they literally couldn't even see sometimes these colonists coming because they just look so different using technology they had never fully experienced before. And so it was out of their realm of reality what was even possible. So is it any different to us in this day and age, right? That's
Well,
the question we got to ask.
Just imagine CNN, BBC, Fox, your local news channels that your parents or you watch every night, glued to it probably since in the last 3 years. And imagine the campaign if they were all talking about giants and bones and mound structures and monoliths, and they were all running the stories being like, just found out, 14-foot tall skeletons, ancient footprints, anomalies. If they all ran it, would it be, ridiculed? And they could all run it. There is enough to talk about this kind of stuff. It could happen. I'm just wondering, if they all were talking about what insert phenomenon X,
Yeah.
whether it be ghosts or if there was science
ETs,
about ghosts,
whatever.
ETs, Sasquatch. If Sasquatch was truly found and they ran it, which would probably be the worst thing for the poor guys.
Yeah.
What would people be saying around the water coolers? What would they be saying in the line of the grocery store? What would they be saying around the dinner tables? Because you're right. Our perception of our reality is so strong and we're heavily influenced by it. So keep that in mind as you walk through this world, that your perception is very powerful, and to try and have a positive one.
100%. So to wrap things up, we like to now do a little shout out. We've been doing some shout outs for our favorite comments on YouTube right now.
Yeah.
And some of our subscribers have seen that we are doing this and they're enjoying it. So
Shout out time. Are you
shout
going to
out
be the
time.
one? Who's going to be our favorite subscriber this week?
So, and we don't worry, we love you all equally, but we got to choose one person for the fun of this.
We're just playing a favorite game.
Exactly. So
There's
today,
a difference.
there's a difference, everyone. Trust me. Okay, we're equal. You know what? We're just honest with who we are, and we're definitely not perfect. That's for sure. And you know what? None of us are. We got to enjoy that about each other. I think we like to have fun and poke fun because that's really the way I like to navigate my life personally. So, Rob Lundy, thank you so much for the comment on our video around sound levitation. He says, fascinating and one of your best. Thank you. This technology isn't ignored, more like suppressed and covered up by the current reigning global authorized establishment. Rob, could not agree more, my friend. Thank you so much for that comment. You're absolutely right. And thank you for enjoying our sound levitation video. There is some crazy technology that's showcased there. And we're also really proud of that one because it does push the old imagination. And once again, if you're going to give the population, why are these things suppressed? Why is the knowledge of giants suppressed? Why is this alternative technology suppressed? Because no one's going to make money. And if you do, it's not the people that are currently making money. So it upsets a lot of apple carts, right?
Well, yeah, think of it. If this all, malnutritious, nutritioned man could dig up and move blocks that cranes, with all the hydraulic power they have, are struggling to do. If he can do it, then what else are we all capable of? We could basically build monuments. A small village could, if it was that easy. So,
well, yeah, we don't need them anymore. I think that's the thing too, is we when these technologies and these capabilities that we all have within us, 97% of our DNA untapped. Don't forget that, everybody. 97% of our DNA unused. Okay, it's amazing the potential that's in there. This DNA is also godlike DNA that we know from Sumerian clay tablets and other many pieces of evidence that support that we were genetically basically hybridized, and we have unbelievably powerful DNA. Among all the other abilities that we have, psychic abilities, we know this through things like remote viewing, etc. So what aren't we tapping into? And here's the thing is, once we do tap into this, we can heal ourselves. We can do anything. We can communicate throughout the universe instantly with anyone and anything. We can do whatever we want. So all of a sudden, the institutions, the industries, the things that we rely on now, we don't have to use anymore. We don't need any of them anymore. And that's, I think, one of the biggest fears for the powers that be that love to have this control over us, is that if we discover our true potential, well, it's game over completely.
But us, achieving that true potential will be probably the best thing for our entire society, because I often wonder, if the ancients that we see in the past that did such great things and had these societies that we today marvel at and have all that, wonder, and we see that they had, better ways of life than us, we could get back to that. And I think that we need to get back to that in some ways. Obviously everything is, it is a now, it won't be what it was then, but yeah, through your, meditation, proper sleep, good food, clean water without a bunch of chemicals in it and a bunch of chemicals on your food, and, try not to eat your junk food, and get enough sunlight, and see what happens in your life. Because those are just the basic building blocks that we all struggle with. I struggle with it too, but I try and keep that in the back of my head, that I might have superpowers in me, and so do you. So give yourself the best fighting chance to start seeing how that makes you feel.
Absolutely, Brandon. So well said. And thanks everyone again for tuning in to this episode on Giants, on Ancient Mysteries Unearthed. Here, we always appreciate you tuning in. And as Brandon always likes to say, I'm going to steal it for this one today: stay kind, stay curious. Thank you so much for checking into this episode. And Brandon, any last words for you, my friend?
Just remember that we're doing our comment challenge. So drop a comment, make it hot, make it spicy, give us a hot take. It doesn't have to be pro us. It could be, maybe you have a different view. It doesn't matter. We just want engagement. We want to create that soup of different ideas. And we just are so grateful that you're here watching it. Do like, subscribe, share it around with your friends if you thought it was great. For only 33 cents a day, you can support Chris and his expeditions and supporting the Ancient Mysteries Unearthed community that is going to open up so many doors to you, offer so many great platforms for you and benefits. So just such a pleasure to have you here. Your generosity of your time and any other contributions you can make to this channel is so welcomed, and so are you. And thank you so much for your thoughts, your views, your comments, and just you being here on this planet with us.
Thanks, everyone, and take care. We'll see you next time.